Thank you, members. We're now moving on to questions to the Minister for Education. I can advise the House that questions numbers 7, 11 and 13 have been withdrawn. The first question is Ms Sinead Bradley, who will be asking it remotely. Ms Bradley. We can bring up Ms Bradley on the screen, please.
Question 1.
On the 24th of November 2021, the High Court delivered its judgment in a case where some contents of a post-primary school's admissions criteria for transfer 2021 were challenged by an applicant. In its judgment, the Court found that a criterion prioritising boys whose father or guardian attended the school, and I should clarify that this is an all-boys school, was found to be unlawful in that it represented unjustified indirect discrimination contrary to Article 18 of the Race Relations Northern Ireland Order 1997. The drawing up of admissions criteria is a matter for individual boards of governors, and my department cannot compel schools to use specific criteria. What my department can do, however, is issue guidance to schools on the post-primary admissions process that schools must by law have regard to. In the most recent guidance, which issued in November 2021, my department specifies the criteria that it is recommended schools should and should not use. One type of criteria it is recommended the schools should not use is any familial criteria beyond sibling currently attending the school. My department has now written to all post-primary schools to draw their attention to the judgment of the Court and to advise that such an admissions criterion should not be used, nor should any similar criterion. Given the timing of the judgment, my department extended the deadline for submission of admissions criteria by post-primary schools to allow boards of governors to review their draft admissions criteria for transfer 2022, if necessary.
Ms Bradley for supplementary.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Could I ask the Minister what plans she has to do an evaluation across the system to be prepared for any disruption that this may cause?
And I thank the member for a question. And obviously, my department has written to all of the schools who would possibly be affected by this. I don't anticipate there will be a great deal of disruption. However, what we have done is ensured that any lessons learned, particularly even in relation to Transfer 2021, are reflected in guidance and communication to post-primary schools.
Mr Pat Sheehan.
Agad a ceann agus buchas leis an ara as up the fragra go dtí seo. Thank you, Minister, for answers so far. And there were numerous reports last year of post-primary schools using admissions criteria that ran counter or contradicted the guidance from the department. And despite the distress and upset being caused to children and their parents, there is no sanction or repercussion for schools who don't adhere to the guidance. Is it not time, Minister, for this guidance to be put on a statutory footing so that our school children are protected and supported? And
I do thank the member for his question. And just with regards to sanctions, with regards to those schools who obviously had quite a number of appeals upheld, my department has written to them. We are in a position where we are evaluating the outcome of that. I expect that action will be taken by against boards of governors who continue to go against the guidelines which the department has issued. However, you will know that the setting of admissions criteria is by law a matter of for school boards of governors, and my department does issue advice. And while schools must by law have regard to this guidance, the setting of admissions criteria does still remain a matter for schools. Uniform admissions criteria would mean that in many instances the same children would be prioritised at all schools, so in effect then that creates an additional problem which would then need to be reflected.
Mr Chris Little.
Principal Deputy Speaker, it is regrettable that it required legal action for schools to follow the Department of Education guidance, but can I ask what action the Education Minister has taken to implement the Fair Start expert panel recommendation that the, and I quote, systemic inequality of academic selection for admissions be addressed as a priority?
The member will be aware that issues in relation to schools which use transfer as a means for criterion is very much up to those individual schools.
Mr Harry Harvey.
Thank you, Principal Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister for answers thus far. Minister, we are approaching the end of the transfer test for September 2022 admission, and given that some children may not have been able to sit one or more of the tests due to COVID, would the Minister be in a position to outline what may happen in that situation? Thank you.
I thank the member for his question. He will be aware that the tests that are operated by PTC are held in one day, and there is a supplementary assessment this Saturday for any child who could not sit the first test. AQE tests were held over consecutive Saturdays, and it's therefore possible the child who did test positive for COVID could have missed more than one test. While neither the entrance tests nor the content of schools' admissions criteria are a matter for my department, guidance has previously issued to schools highlighting the importance of a special provision route in a school's admissions criteria. The special provision route can cater for applicants who have not been able to sit the tests by providing a means of assessing their applications in line with other applications. In a sense, this is no different to other years where illness may have prevented a child from sitting entrance tests. The approach taken will be determined by each school, and parents in this position can see the approach adopted by their preferred schools when criteria are published on the 12th of January 2022.
Claire Bailey.
Deputy Speaker, Minister, what actions can either you or your department take in the case of unappointed board members to voluntary grammars specifically if they were found to be acting unlawfully or not adhering to TNC?
Okay, I thank the member for her question, and obviously there must be something behind that question, and I'd be happy to speak to the member in relation to that.
Mr John Blair.
Speaker, question number 2.
We need to be very clear. The Gillen report does not recommend a review of the minimum content on relationships and sexuality education. Indeed, it does not recommend greater legal prescription within the curriculum as an immediate course of action. Rather, it calls on my department to encourage schools to include issues around serious sexual offences within their curriculum. Only if that proves ineffective does it recommend mandating legislation. My department is therefore taking forward important work to enhance support, resources and training for schools. A wide range of resources have been developed and are available on the SIA RSE Hub. This approach is designed to improve confidence and capacity in RSE. Violence against women and girls was specifically prioritised as requiring additional curriculum resources and guidance. Violence against women and girls was specifically prioritised as requiring additional curriculum resources and guidance. My department has also been working with the Department of Justice to consider the issues specifically raised in the Gillen Review. As a consequence of this work, I've asked my officials to prepare additional guidelines for schools setting out the importance of ensuring the issues highlighted by the Gillen Review, including serious sexual offences and consent, to make sure that they are covered within the curriculum. In response to concerns about sexual offences, mainly against girls, my department has commissioned the Education and Training Inspectorate to carry out an evaluation of the approaches and challenges in delivering effective preventative safeguarding practicalities in schools. The evaluation will provide an important evidence base on the teaching of RSE in the curriculum and on the issue of violence against girls. We need to build a clear and up-to-date picture of provision in schools to inform the most appropriate next steps.
Mr Blair.
Principal Deputy Speaker, I want to thank the Minister for that answer, particularly the priority given to the amount of reference to the very serious issue of violence against women and girls. In light of that, can I ask the Minister if she has met the Justice Minister if there's a plan to meet the Justice Minister and when that might take place.
And I thank the member for his question. The Justice Minister met my predecessor, Peter Weir, earlier this year, and as a consequence of that, work has been continuing, very close work has been continuing between officials, particularly on the Education and Awareness Working Group. I'm content and happy to meet with the Justice Minister as that work progresses, and as he'll note, there's considerable work has been undertaken by my department alongside and in conjunction with the Department of Justice.
Mr. Robin Newton.
Thank you, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker. Obviously a very serious question being asked here, Minister, and indeed one that requires wide consultation. So could I ask the Minister what consultations she or her department officials have had with the churches on this matter?
Yeah, and I thank the member for his question, and obviously my department consults with a broad range of groups with regards to all aspects of policy. In November 2020, SIA set up an RSE task and finish group with representatives from my department, Evangelical Alliance, Christian Action, Research and Education, Love for Life, the Christian Institute, the Baptist Association and the Elim Group of Churches to carry out specific engagement with Christian churches around the RSE Hub project. And the aim of this group is to ensure that a Christian perspective is developed and promoted and shared on the Hub.
Nicola Brogan.
I thank the Minister for answers so far. Minister, I am deeply concerned, though, in the delay in taking forward the recommendations for a review into the RSE minimum content order. Our children and young people deserve RSE that is fact-based, inclusive and age-appropriate, and we should see it being consistent and mandatory across all of our schools. So can I ask the Minister when we were likely to see progress on this issue, please?
I thank the member for her question, and as I did say in the main response, that Gillen raises a number of important issues for my department and indeed others which it's working to address. But I suppose it is really worth noting that none of the recommendations included in Sir Justice Gillen's report refer to amendments to the minimum contact order. And there are, as the member will be aware, issues around being prescriptive with regards to a number of these things. However, what we do need to do is to ensure that our teachers are given the ability to have appropriate resources and to be able to develop their confidence and their competence. But Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker, my department hasn't been found wanting in this either, in that we have actually been working through a number of programmes in order to give effect to Sir Justice Gillen's review. We've been liaising, as I say, with Department of Justice. We've been working very closely with schools in relation to this, and obviously with SIA in ensuring that there is appropriate resource made available to teachers. We have worked as a department since the Marshall report on child sexual exploitation in 2014 was published, and in fact I contributed to that report at the time. So we have been working very closely with SIA in developing the hub and making sure that there are appropriate resources in place.
Mr. Capel-Boylan.
Cash Deborah 3, let a hold question number 3, please.
My department's guidance seeks to balance the need to ensure a safe environment with the need for children to access face-to-face teaching. I've therefore been led by public health advice on COVID mitigations in schools. On contact tracing in schools, we have moved on considerably from the start of the school year, when large numbers of pupils were having to self-isolate as close contacts. This caused disruption in schools, with large numbers of children missing school and increased pressure on principals. In his open letter on the 9th of September, the Chief Medical Officer explained that it was the right time for the PHA to lead on contact tracing in schools and to use a more targeted approach to the identification of pupil close contacts. The more targeted approach taken by the PHA in identifying close contacts in school has resulted in improved attendance figures in schools. The PHA leading on contact tracing has reduced the burden on teachers and school leaders, who are no longer required to have a role in contact tracing. I understand the concerns that some members of this House and parents have expressed around the current approach to contact tracing. and it was not an easy decision. However, I believe it was right that the Minister of Health and I accepted the professional advice of the Chief Medical Officer on this issue. As a result, it has significantly reduced the disruption for pupils, parents and schools. I recognise that the current high number of COVID cases, both in the community and in schools, has made it very challenging for schools. Many schools are experiencing difficulties at present with teacher absenteeism and availability of substitute teachers as a consequence of this.
Last one, and could thank the Minister for her answer. Minister, the Executive has made it clear the need to refocus and redouble our efforts to bring COVID infections under control and avoid further restrictions. Our school communities obviously have a role to play in that, but many school leaders feel they are not receiving adequate support. So my question is, can I ask the Minister what further measures she will take to ensure the safety of our pupils, their families and school staff?
Thank the member for his question, and I don't underestimate the pressure that there is on schools particularly, and obviously on families who are being affected. But the Executive was very clear in relation to the fact that we have to make sure that our young people maximise the number of days that they are in school, because I think the long-term impacts on them with regards to not only their education but also their mental and emotional well-being is incredibly important, and we need to be mindful of that. There are mitigations that are specified in my department's guidance to schools, and obviously there's a range of mitigations that will have to be put in place at the school level to reflect individual circumstances of each school. The guidance allows school leaders to be flexible in how they manage COVID risks in their school, and this builds obviously on the learning that will have been gained over the course of the pandemic. Schools are encouraged to take a cautious and very much a risk-based approach to the operation of their school. The Executive decided in August that post-primary pupils should continue to wear face coverings, and this is obviously based on public health advice, and this continues to apply. There will also be asymptomatic testing programmes for post-primary and special schools and all school staff. The PHA vaccination programme, as you'll be aware of, continues to be rolled out to those aged 12 and over. Schools are also advised to maximise ventilation wherever possible, and EAA are supporting schools that identify issues with this, including the provision of CO2 monitors. Schools are also encouraged to maintain pupils in consistent groups where possible and to promote good hand and respiratory hygiene practices, and schools are encouraged to facilitate social distancing. My department has also issued guidance to schools in respect of remote learning and allowing them the flexibility to do this. Employing authorities are working very closely with schools who are experiencing staff difficulties to provide additional help in making sure that they have appropriate teaching cover where available. So we are very mindful of all that, and we are being responsive to schools when they require assistance.
Mrs. Diane Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Principal Deputy Speaker. And I think we will all agree with the Minister that it is of the highest priority to keep all of our young people in school, not just for their education, but for their emotional health and well-being. Could the Minister, in light of the rising number of infections, maybe perhaps give the House a flavour of the number of pupils who are in attendance at school at the moment?
Thank the member for her question. My officials obviously monitor weekly and monthly pupil attendance levels, and that will inform all relevant partners regarding absent trends. It's clear that attendance levels in the current academic year are not as high as we would ideally like. At primary level, overall attendance for September to October period was 93.2%. In the same period last year, it was 95.1%, which is a reduction of 1.9. At post-primary level for the same period, overall attendance was 91% this year. This compares to 93.1% for the same period last year, a 2.1% reduction. While obviously COVID impacts attendance levels, it's not just the only factor. Based on the weekly attendance figures for the week up to the 22nd of November, COVID-19 absences accounted for 1.9%, where pupils were learning from home and therefore present accounted for 1.2%. All other absences, including authorised and unauthorised absence, accounted for 8.8% of the total. So really what we can conclude from that data is that while COVID is a factor, it's not by any means the only factor at play.
Paula Bradshaw.
Deputy Speaker. Minister, there's a lot of rumours and speculation that you will have a circuit breaker coming up to Christmas. Can you confirm or deny that? Thank you.
And I thank the member for her question. And obviously this has been mooted. Actually, this was mooted in August before schools started back, that there would be a circuit breaker at Halloween, and that didn't happen. And I know that there have been a number of press queries and statements in relation to that. There are no plans for mass closure or use of a circuit breaker in schools at this point. The Executive's decision on COVID responses in school has been and will continue to be guided by the medical and scientific evidence, and you will be mindful of the fact that there was a statement made on behalf of the Executive last Thursday which reiterated that position in relation to schools. I am aware of the harm that's been caused to children and young people by school closures. It's in all of our interests that we continue to provide access to classroom-based teaching for all pupils. And I think really as a society, while we were very conscious of watching out for the health service, I think we need to be very mindful of that we watch out for our schools and ensure that the behaviour that we have outside of the classroom is reflected in that, and that we do protect our schools by how we behave in playgrounds and in various other settings to ensure that schools do not then become infected.
Mr. Roy Beggs.
Question number 6.
Number 4.
Okay. Abbey Community College was announced as a major capital works project in June 2014. A business case for the project was approved, with the preferred option being identified as a new build site at 3 Mile Water in Newtonabbey. The site is currently owned by Antrim and Newtonabbey Borough Council. The estimated cost for the project is in the region of £34.3 million. This will provide accommodation and outside play facilities for the school, whose approved enrolment number is 820 pupils. RIBA Stage 2 concept design approval was granted by the Department on the 20th of October this year, and Stage 3 detailed design is in progress. A planning proposal for application notice has been lodged, and a planning pre-application community consultation event took place on the 24th of November 2021 by webinar. It's anticipated that a full planning application will be lodged early in 2022. Subject to planning approval being granted and successful site acquisition, it's anticipated that construction work on the new build site will commence in 2023. The estimated construction period is 24 months, with construction expected to be completed for the 2025-26 academic year. Following the school's decant to the new building, it's intended that the existing school building will be demolished, and thereafter the Education Authority will consider the future use of the site.
Mr. Beggs.
Minister, it's some 6 years since the Abbey Community College opened its doors following the amalgamation of Monkstown Community School and Newtonabbey Community College. Does the Minister agree that amalgamations which follow the area plan, which is designed to improve educational outcome, particularly for young people that have not been reaching their full attainment, should be better supported and encouraged rather than experience such delays? And will she ensure that there would not be any further delays? And further to that, would she ensure that Carrickfergus Academy will not take such a long time to get to this stage in the future?
Thank the member for his question, and I agree with him in relation to how the process is. However, we're in a situation where this amalgamation took place quite a considerable time ago, back in 2014, and as a consequence of that, then it has taken quite a considerable amount of time. I understand that the challenges that were presented were actually in identifying a suitable site that would provide sufficient space to accommodate the accommodation that was required, plus outdoor play facilities, and a number of site searches had to be conducted. It then followed through that a business case was required to test options, and it took several months then to complete the business case. I genuinely don't disagree with the member whenever he talks about the length of time that's required, particularly for amalgamations. And these are discussions which I have had with officials, because there are a number of similar schools, not only in East Antrim but right across Northern Ireland, which have found themselves in the same position, in that development proposals are brought forward, and there's obviously certainly a carrot presented of the prospect of a new school, and it can take many years for this actually to come to fruition. And certainly those pupils who are in the school at the time of a DP being proposed are unlikely then to see the benefits of the new school. So I am in agreement with the member in relation to that, and I do think that the system needs to be refined in order to reflect that.
Mr. Stuart Dixon.
Deputy Speaker, and thank you, Minister, and indeed thank you to my colleague from East Antrim for raising these important issues, both about Abbey Community College and also Carrickfergus as well. Minister, while there is a general welcome, indeed a very important welcome for the planning application for the Community College at Monkstown at Abbey, Minister, concern has been raised by constituents with me about the potential loss of a statutory Education Authority youth provision within the existing school building. There is one in the existing school building, but none is planned for the new school building. Can the Minister outline the plans to deliver a statutory youth provision in the area that may be lost as a result of the demolition of the old school building?
And I thank the member for his question, and I'm assuming that he is referring to the relocation of the Bridge Youth Club. I understand that the EA Youth Capital Team are considering options in relation to the relocation of that, and as it currently operates within the Abbey Community College. A technical feasibility report to identify options and costs for the relocation of the club has been commenced by the EA, and then following completion of this, a full business case will also need to be completed to consider and approve the preferred option and anticipated costs for the project. And for the members' information, obviously controlled youth capital is a separate funding stream from the controlled schools funding stream. But I understand that obviously proposals for the youth centre at the Doak Road site may have implications for other providers in the area, and this would also need to be taken into consideration.
Mr. Jerry Kelly.
Going by this lesson, I thank the Minister for her answer up to now. The Minister will be aware that College the First in West Belfast is hugely oversubscribed, and she will probably also be aware that because you mentioned sign-ups to the enrolment, that there is also a huge list to get into it. Under our duty as the statutory duty to encourage and facilitate Irish medium education, could she detail where we are in terms of the development of an additional campus for College de Firship?
The member for his question, and I understand that there are pressures on the current site, and that there is a capital works programme for additional classrooms which is currently out for tender. I understand that, although I don't have the detail, I understand that my officials have been working very closely with the sectoral representatives to identify and examine potential sites and various options in North Belfast and also the wider Newton Abbey area for quite some time. But I can assure you assure the member that the work will continue in relation to examining feasibility of sites identified, and if there are other options which are brought to their attention, they will obviously look at those too. But I am very mindful of the duties that I have, and as are my officials.
Sir George Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Principal Speaker. Just asking the Minister if there's any update on the new sports hall for Limavady High School after her recent visit to the school.
And I thank the member for his question, and unfortunately I don't have an update for that at this stage, and I'm happy to come back to the member.
All politics is local. Mr. Stephen Dunn.
Principal Deputy Speaker, question number 5.
The Safer Schools Northern Ireland app is a one-stop shop digital library of age-appropriate safeguarding resources for teacher, parents, carers and children and young people. I formally launched the app on the 9th of November 2021, and in the short time that has elapsed since then, some 50% of schools have now been registered and have access to their new Safer Schools NI app. The app provides schools with access to contemporary, credible and relevant online safety guidance and alerts. It's helping schools navigate online challenges and is offering advice on how parents and carers can make online devices safer for their children. In cases where school staff encounter online abuse, having access to the Safer Schools NI app and to the professionals who provide it will enable up-to-date support to be given to schools quickly. Helping our children and young people stay safe in the digital world has never been more important. I would encourage all schools to register for the app if they have not done so already, and I would strongly encourage school staff, parents, carers and pupils to download the app by doing so we can help our school communities be safer online.
I'm afraid that's the conclusion of this element of question time. We now move on to topical questions, and the first person on my list is Ms Paula Bradshaw.
Well, Deputy Speaker, Minister, I rise in connection to the CO2 monitors. A constituent of mine contacted me to say that one of the lights had turned red on one of the monitors, and when they asked for guidance on what the school was meant to do in that situation, there weren't any. So could you please give us an update on what schools do if a monitor turns red? Thank you.
I thank the member for her question, and that's actually probably getting into the technical details in relation to that. What I would be advising is obviously that they do contact EA, and obviously if that support isn't coming freely enough, well then I'm happy to follow up on behalf of the member with the school.
Yes, when they asked for guidance, is that there wasn't any, but my supplementary question relates to the HEPA air filter. I'm just wondering, are you going to actually purchase those for the school as well, just to purify the air? Thank you.
Okay, thank the member for her question. And obviously, as she's aware, there was £2 million secured by my department through the October monitoring round, and that was for the purchase of CO2 monitors and other ventilation works. I understand I've had conversations with my officials and obviously with EA with regards to filtration units. What they are doing is actually assessing each school as a request comes in. And I do understand that while there's a divided opinion as to whether or not they do as they say they do, I think the focus will probably primarily be on those schools or those rooms which do not have windows. And I have actually witnessed going out and around schools that probably more and more storerooms are now being used as classrooms, particularly for Engage and for counselling and so on. So there probably are many more rooms that probably may require something like that. However, that is something that EA are responding to on a case-by-case basis. But I would actually probably just draw attention to the fact that EA have now 10,000 CO2 monitors. And at this point in time, my information is that only 45 schools have requested them and only 400 have been distributed. So I would encourage schools who need them to certainly put that request in, because we do have them.
Ms Ciara Ferguson.
Speaker, Minister, you will be aware of reports that up to 20% of schools have experienced at least partial closure, particularly due to staff shortages. School leaders are being left increasingly in difficult positions to access substitute cover. So can I ask the Minister to update us on her plans to ensure schools have access to adequate substitute cover in the time ahead?
I thank the member for her question, and obviously the employing authorities are working very closely with schools in order to try to address this. As should be aware, the NISTA register has in the region between 7,000 and 8,000 teachers registered. However, there are challenges with that, in that maybe 3,000 of them are on sort of longer term or temporary contracts, and it is really incumbent on schools and also the supply teacher to ensure that NISTA are notified that they are in employment, because it does create a challenge for principals whenever they're having to sit at the last minute trying to ring round maybe 70 to 100 different individuals to see whether they're available to come into their schools. As I've said in previous response, EA do have a designated named officer for human resources in the emergency resourcing team who work closely with schools in order to try to address this. I have looked at other options which have been suggested in order to see if we can maybe enhance the register. We've looked at the options around student teachers, retired teachers, staff within the ETI and EA, and also volunteers, because you may be aware that last year the department did put out a call for volunteers who could supervise within schools, and there was a response of over 1,000 applicants. In fact, I myself applied at that time to do sort of holiday cover if it was required. So we have been looking at various options around that, and sometimes they're a little bit more limited, particularly around student teachers who themselves have had their own training disrupted and already are in workplaces. So I suppose the flexibility around even seconding them is a challenge.
Ms Ferguson for a supplementary.
Thank you, Minister, and I welcome that there is some plan in place and you're trying to exhaust a range of measures, and hopefully this will turn the situation around. But I suppose at the heart of the issue, it's the needs of children and our young people who have yet to experience another term of unsettledness and disrupted learning, and probably with regards to their exams too, it's going to be a difficult time. So can I ask the Minister how she intends to support exam candidates in the context of this huge disruption they've experienced to date? Thank you.
Okay, and I thank the member for her question. And obviously my priority is that examinations do take place this academic year. I'm very mindful that we have A-level students who are now going into their first public examinations. They didn't have the experience of GCSEs or ASs, and that in itself is incredibly I suppose an anxious time for them, never mind the challenges that there are as COVID is still with us. You will be aware obviously that there has been a November series of exams which have run between the 22nd of November until the 2nd of December. And that's just been concluded, and as a consequence of that, then SIA will look at some of the data then coming back from schools with regards to those young people who may have missed examinations, and they'll be able to look to see the reasons actually why maybe they haven't turned up. But there will be options obviously later in the year for them to do those modules again, particularly in February and again during the summer series. So we will be working alongside schools to assist those pupils who perhaps miss exams at this point in the year. She will be aware that very early on before the summer break that we did make announcements in relation to and trying to take account of the potential for disruptions to exams this year. So where learners will be permitted to omit units of assessment, which will actually then reduce the overall assessment. But we have put other mitigations in place and other methods of assistance, particularly through GCSE maths, and there was an Engage programme which was focused particularly on that. So we are keeping in mind to what's going on, and certainly any further contingency arrangements that are required will be put in place.
Ms Cara Hunter.
I'd like to thank the Minister for her answers so far, and I'm mindful the question I have, aspects of it have already been answered. However, in the most recent Justice Question Time, Minister Long had stated she would like to work closer with yourself and your department regarding sexual consent education and wider aspects of RSE, but she was regretful about your lack of or level of engagement, and I respect that she did meet with your predecessor, Mr Weir. But Minister, can you commit today to meeting with the Justice Minister on these vital, crucial issues that impact our young people? Thank you.
And I do thank the member for her question. As I did say in my earlier response to the member, Mr Blair, that I am committed very much to ensuring that work is done in order to protect and to prevent violence against women, and particularly exploitation against young girls. I have no issue with meeting the Justice Minister, but as I did say in my earlier answer, our officials are working very closely together, and the department is progressing to ensure that resources and so on are in place to assist teachers in raising awareness within schools.
Ms Hunter.
And thank you, Minister, for your answer. Can you provide a timeline on the review of consent and wider RSE in our curriculum? Thank you.
I thank again the Minister or the member for her question, and this is something which is moving on and has been moving on at pace. I don't have a particular timeline, but I'm happy to come back to the member with regards to that. But obviously, as information comes to the department, things evolve, and it's very much a moving feast. But I'm content to come back to her with regards to the main tenet of the work that we're doing.
Mr Robbie Butler.
Mr Principal Deputy Speaker. The Minister will be aware of the very successful first Disabled People's Parliament held here on Friday the 3rd of December in this very chamber. The Speaker's raised many challenges to us as legislators. Minister, Mrs Christine and Lillian McClements raised the issue of equal access to public services. What steps are you taking to ensure that this is a reality for children at all educational facilities?
And I thank the member for his question. Unfortunately, I haven't been able to see the Parliament yet, but I do intend to watch it. Obviously, DDA pupil-specific minor works are a priority for my department. We obviously have challenging budgets, but that is a priority, and we see that throughout our schools. What we do need to do is obviously to raise awareness within schools and making sure that all pupils have access to facilities, and I'm happy to work with any school in order to provide that.
Mr Butler.
I thank the Minister for her answer, and I would encourage her to watch the video. It's very good, and it's very challenging. What work can the department and yourself do to ensure that the voice of those people, those parents and those children that actually have that user experience is heard, and that whatever they tell us is actually actioned?
Thank him for his question. Obviously, my department and the Education Authority do work very closely with schools and young people and parents, and certainly if there's anything which needs to be adapted, they will respond to that. We also work very closely with contractors too to ensure that if there are requests, that they're done in a delivery time frame which is useful to the school as well. I have been in schools which have a variety of different methods. They have of making the school accessible, but there are other schools which require quite considerable amount of intervention. And unfortunately, I was at one school quite recently who told me that really because of the different levels within the school, that in some ways that put off young people with a disability, and that's something that we shouldn't have in this day and age.
Ms Rachel Woods.
Thank you, Mr Principal Deputy Speaker. Can I ask the Minister to outline what powers her department has over school uniform policy across schools in Northern Ireland?
Okay, and I thank the member for her question. And as the member will be aware, I mean, obviously this is a very live issue and something which was very much in focus, particularly coming towards the start of the new term. My school does issue my department does issue guidance to schools, and obviously will advise in relation to making sure that all uniforms are accessible to pupils.
Ms Woods.
Thank you, and I thank the Minister for her answer. Saturday week ago, I attended Northern Ireland Youth Forum's Have Your Say Day on Education. We heard directly from young people on uniform policy and them not having the choice to wear trousers and being forced to wear skirts, as an example. So could I ask the Minister to commit to ensure that student voices are heard and that pupils have an active part in the creation of school uniform guidance within the schools?
Okay, and I thank the member for her question. And as she'll be aware, my department has now commenced and has agreed terms of reference for a review of school uniform, particularly around the grants, but also the policy aspects of that. And we will be taking a cognizance probably of changes which have taken place across the water. As she'll be aware, school councils now also have quite a considerable input into school uniform, be that the design or otherwise, and boards of governors can be more or less responsive to that. So very much the voice of young people is important within the school, but certainly within the review, both the views of parents and young people will be taken into consideration.
Mr Alan Chambers.
Principal Deputy Speaker. Minister, I note in the press over the weekend that your department is preparing plans to deal with the disruption been caused by the number of teachers not able to attend work because of COVID infections. Would it not have been prudent to have had this plan in place when schools returned in September?
I thank the member for his question, and obviously the plans which are in place is all very fluid and will be responsive. We are very mindful of the fact that there are between 7,000 and 8,000 teachers on the NISTR register. The pressures that have been placed on that have been as a consequence of a number of actions, not only just because of COVID, but also because there have been a number of quite a considerable number of those teachers are now involved in engaged programmes and so on as well. And of course they too will have been sick or unable to attend to work for whatever reason. As you know, this is a very fluid situation, and we are working and responding to assist schools wherein we can.
10 seconds and a 10-second answer. Mr. Chambers.
Let it go.
You're happy enough?
Yeah.
The Minister looks delighted. That concludes questions to the Minister for Education. If members take their ease for a moment, we'll then resume the hunting bill. Thank you.